Guys kind of file in. In fact, let me get my drink. Hang on a second. Hang on. Delicious. What is happening, everybody? Hope everybody's having a fantastic, whatever day you're watching this. So, it's going to be a bit of a short show tonight, but I want to touch on a topic that has been coming up a lot. And I feel like this topic kind of does deserve its own standalone video. But what I want to talk about are transmissions, transmission tuning. It's something that is never really brought up. And one of the issues is that when you look at the overall package, the vehicle as a whole, you've got to remember that you're looking at not just the engine, the power output and all of that, but last I checked, you don't drive these things around on an engine dyno. The reality is that it's a car or a truck or whatever it is that you're running, and the transmission has got to be taken into account. I think one of the biggest issues that a lot of guys have is that they simply forget that at some point during your build, unless you own a Hellcat, you're going to have to upgrade the transmission. And this is for any GM, Ford, Dodge, it doesn't matter. If you've got an HP70, an HP75, although that really HP75 hasn't been tested, I don't feel like, on the Mopar side. But getting back to it, HP70 on the Mopar side, which is going to be your typical anything but a Hellcat transmission, your 6R80, your 4L80, your 4L60, just go down the list. At some point, these transmissions are going to hit the limit. Now, the HP90 that's in the Hellcat is an incredibly stout transmission. I don't know of a lot of folks that have hit limits with that, to be honest with you. But for the guys that are looking to put superchargers on, a 392 car, or they want to put together a pretty significant build on a 5.7, you're going to have to upgrade the trans. And if you've got a NAG 1, you're not out of the boat on this either if you're a Mopar guy. It's an older transmission. It's a 5-speed as opposed to the 8-speed. And it's a hell of a transmission. Matter of fact, fun fact on this, the NAG 1 was the transmission, the tuning in that transmission in a Challenger is what both impressed me the most, and I don't even know what the right word is. I had a Lightning that I was doing a ton of transmission tuning to, only to get it about as good as the NAG 1 in terms of command, downshifting, things like that. NAG 1's a hell of a good transmission, so don't sell it short. But I think you can kind of see where I'm going with this. And in the short amount of time we've got tonight, because again, it's going to be a bit of a short show, but I wanted to talk about this because I get so many questions about how to make more power. And I guess that's the sexy part of it, right? Like, people want to have the more power part of this. But more to that point, what they don't really get is you're building an automobile. And this is not a video game. And I think that where guys really get it twisted is they forget that you can't throw 600-700 horsepower at a stock transmission and expect it to live. This happens to happen the most with the 392 crowd with superchargers, but it's not outside of the range of possibly running into an issue if you've got like a 6.1 car and you're wanting to put boost to it. But here's the other side of it. Okay, so yeah, you can build the transmission, and there's a lot of transmission tuning that you've got to do once that transmission is built. So it's not just a matter of will the trans hold the power. The 10R80 is a really good example of this. The 10R80 with the new basket that's in the newer transmissions is actually pretty stout. And it's I don't know that it's HP90 stout, but it is fairly robust by comparison. It'll handle, at least 700 foot-pounds, which is a lot. That's a really good number. But if you were looking to, even boosting Mustangs mildly, you can, with the older 10R80, you can start to run into issues. So I guess the point that I'm getting to is it doesn't take much with some vehicles to actually start taxing the transmission. And it's why I would tell guys, look, if you really want to build this thing, you're going to have to build it from the back forward. That means axle shafts, cradle lockouts in some cases. You're going to have to deal with transmission builds. And then I guess the point that I was getting to was a lot of times you start messing with transmission builds, different clutch packs, different valve bodies. Now the transmission, I've run into this problem with one company that was rebuilding NAG 1s where they were just really harsh from the factory. And I mean, you had to kind of dial these things back. And there were some like back and forth with these guys. We're telling them, look, man, this thing, I mean, this would be great if you're building a monster truck, right? But, it needed to be a little bit more street oriented. So anyway, just wanted to touch on that real quick and just discuss a little bit with you guys the importance of transmission tuning. Now, to say that they don't take power, they do. I think that, and I don't want to like oversell a point here. These transmissions are actually pretty stout. They'll handle quite a bit of power, provided that they're tuned properly. And I guess this is another issue that guys ran into early on back in the day with transmission tuning. And where that came into play is that they would remove all the torque management that was in that thing. And it's kind of interesting because if you're not familiar with what torque management is, it is the amount of power that, the computer will allow to go through the transmission during a shift. So if you want something that's kind of smooth, a daily driver, you're not really worried so much about outright performance, you may notice that you'll get acceleration, and it's almost like you're riding in a manual transmission. It'll accelerate, you'll feel it kind of drop off, and then it shifts, drop off, then it shifts. The HP70s and like the classic Rams do that. And all it's doing is it's just being easier on the clutch. As you get deeper into acceleration, it'll hit a little bit harder. But the point of it is that that's torque management at work. And you'll hear it as a pop sometimes with Hellcats when they're getting down the track. It doesn't really take away from the performance of the vehicle at wide open throttle. I've done testing with this. I have removed all of the torque management. I've left it stock. I've made slight adjustments to it in these transmission tunes. And I didn't really see huge differences. I think the outright best ET came with no torque management, but that could have also been attributed to some conditions changing as the night went on. In my Hellcat, I always had some level of torque management in play. Now, a lot of guys would ask, well, why do you have none? And it's like, well, no, it still does have torque management. And that's what's allowing this thing to survive the hundreds and hundreds of hits that car had. Between data logging and drag strip hits, it had a Brazilian of them, right? So, but again, the point of all this is to say that back in the day, when tuners didn't really know what they were up to, especially with Mopars, they had two things that they would do. Now, the first thing they would do in a Mopar is they would adjust all of the knock sensor sensitivity to a point where the car would never, ever pull timing because they were seeing false knock. Well, the problem is that the owners of some of those cars, if you're running 93 octane and if you're running 93 octane and your timing values and your fueling are good, do you need them? The knock sensors? I don't know. That's debatable. Some guys said, no, you don't. But they would put an aggressive tune in the car that would still work well with 93 octane. You get a bad tank of gas. They put the wrong gas in the tank. It happens. Yeah, I've even seen where gas stations, the guy puts the wrong gas in the wrong tank and you're pumping 93, but you're really getting 87 or 80. No, it wouldn't be 89, it'd be 87. You think you're getting 91 and you're getting the cheap stuff. So that's also happened to me with E85. That was scary. But the idea is you don't ever do that. Well, that was the one mistake they made on the engine side. On the transmission side, they would wipe out all of the torque management. And although it makes the thing shift really hard, the problem is that the way these modern transmissions are set up, it's something that you really don't want to do. It can definitely act to shorten the transmission life, especially if you're not making other provisions in the tune, ramping up line pressure, shortening shift times. There's some things that you can do to help it live, and it'll be fine usually, but then you start pouring the coal to it, much more power, things like that, and that's when you'd see the transmission start to fail. So the unfortunate reality, though, is that if you've got one of the more performance-oriented variants, whether it's the Camaro, the Mustang, or one of the 392 cars, the transmission is going to be your weak link, and it's always going to be like that. And it's odd to me still that they did not use the HP90 with the 392. That's just a very, very weird thing to me because it's such a good transmission. The HP90, I got to tell you guys, is probably, of all the transmissions that could come in a car stock, that's the most underrated. I think that 90, which is to 900 Newton meters, really ought to be more like HP 140. I mean, the thing is just crazy. I've seen that transmission live through some unbelievable builds. So, there's that. But anyway, let me check in with you guys. Like I say, we've got a short show tonight. Skid saying, sup, B? Got the bald guy with the shades and the flex. Got it first. I like it. Marco is in. Itch is in. Marco said, I want to put a 6.4 Hemi in my LX Mustang. What do you think? I would LS swap it before I'd try to find a Hemi. I really would. Depends on what you're doing with it. If you can find an LS3, that'd be really good because it's all aluminum. I'm saying, hey, B, Skid saying, that's why I only consider a 6-speed Hemi 5.7. It can be. Skids, if I was planning on boosting the LS3 or LT1. Yeah, LT1 with boost is really good. Really, 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 really good. DM is in. Yeah, it's hard to describe just how good the LT platform is in terms of making power. But yeah, for me, it's really more about, when you're putting together a build, it's more about putting together a responsibly built combination. A lot of guys have issue when they're like, for example, like the F-150 crowd. The problem with the F-150 and the Coyote platform in general, it's not an NA build type of a platform. It's too small of an engine. It's like the 5.0, the Coyote, building a naturally aspirated Coyote is kind of like saying, hey, I'm going to build a naturally aspirated 3-liter inline 6. And you're just like, yeah, I mean, it would be cool if it's in the right car, but it's never going to make the power that you want it to. I mean, not unless you rev the thing to about 11,000 RPM. Because that's just how physics works. Small engine, that's great. Great heads, beautiful, but you got to be able to pump the air through it, and that's a finite value. Where LS or LT, they're just much larger engines. You can make them much larger still, and then, a small amount of boost goes a long way. But with the Coyote guys, the problem with the Coyote is that boost is just, it's a magical thing with those vehicles, and a twin turbo Coyote can accidentally make 1,500 horsepower. So, it's one of these things where it'll make power until the thing disintegrates, like it is no longer integrated. Rapid disassembly, rapid violent disassembly takes place. But it'll wreck the transmission way before it gets to that point. So, I'm left a little bit like, I don't know why somebody would want to put together a build and not build the transmission just to, oh, and one of the things the guys go, well, when it blows up, I'll get it fixed. And the problem is that it can frag. It doesn't, sometimes they don't just haze a clutch. If you're lucky, that's all that happens. Or it just doesn't shift. The last thing you want to do is break something when you're pouring the power to it. The engine's holding together just fine, but if something breaks in the transmission and causes that engine to twilight, that's not a good time. And again, that's something that does happen. And your only prayer is that you've caught it before, the rev limiter's caught it before you've done any real damage to the thing. So let me check back in with you guys. Let's see. Like you're saying, what about 7.3 Godzilla? There's a lot of guys that are big time into the 7.3 platform. It's, I mean, like I say, man, that engine shut my mouth. Initially, some of the reports that were coming back on that engine were, if you guys aren't aware, so Ford has the 7.3 liter big block that they were using in trucks. But the thing is, it's got unimaginably good flowing heads. Ford's pretty cool. They engineered an intake manifold. So Ford Racing Performance Parts makes an intake manifold to swap that engine into, or to be one of the accompanying modifications that you need to make that engine work. And I guess it's any of the SN, is it the SN or is it, I don't know. Now I can't remember. Is it the 550s and 650s? I guess you could do it in. Anyway, they make an intake manifold for that. That's what makes Ford really cool, is they're run by engineers and enthusiasts when they're making intake manifolds for a truck engine to go into a car. Anyway, that engine, it's a big engine, throw boost at it, throw NA at it. They're making really good power with it. And at first I thought that thing was going to be nothing more than just a gasoline powered version of a diesel engine. Well, come to find out, it's actually a pretty stout setup. So they're out there. I don't really know everything that it would take to swap in a 7.3, but I like the idea of lightweight, especially if you're messing around with engine swaps. Lightweight is a lot more important to me because you can always find displacement somewhere. And again, the LS3 is great if you keep it naturally aspirated. LS3 is kind of funny. A lot of guys run into issues with LS3s when you start really trying to pour the coal to them. A better bet would be to go with an LS2 with a set of ported LS3 heads. That's kind of where the smart money's at. Or just build a stroker LS2. Little bit more robust block. It's just overall better if you're going to be going boost. But yeah, so I guess I just wanted to, this is also another one of those topics where doing a standalone video can be kind of difficult. You end up with like 50 takes that don't go anywhere. And I tried, this is a video that I haven't tried to do, but I've tried doing videos like this and I end up rambling on. It's almost like I'm on a live show anyway. So if you see a standalone video and it's transmissions, it's, don't forget to tune them, or don't forget to build them and then tune them accordingly. Because again, there is absolutely nothing worse than going through the process and the expense and everything of a build, but that your failed, your transmission is the thing that fails you. That's the part that it'll make you crazy. You wouldn't want to put all this effort and energy into a build only to have the transmission flake be the thing that flakes out on you. But let's see, DM saying, I heard Ford was working on an 8.3 diesel. Does anybody have any word on that? I have absolutely no clue on that one. Be kind of interesting if they did decide to go that route. But no, I have not heard anything on that. There's every few years or so, though, it seems like there's diesel wars where, get these. I just can't believe the power these things are making these days. This blows my mind. But yeah, they're all of them are up there. And again, and even with the diesels, what's the one thing that guys complain about? Transmission. This thing shifts like crap, or this thing burned up in 80,000 miles, and it's just, so there's nothing. The problem too with transmission tuning or transmission in general, doing anything with a trans, is that it's just not sexy. You can say, oh, it's got a built transmission, but nobody cares. Nobody's ever going to ask you, well, what kind of clutches did they use, or what billet components are in there? Nobody cares about that. They just want to know about how much power it makes. And so that can be that can be a little bit of maybe the reason why guys don't get too worked up over getting their transmissions built until it's time to get them built. Again, you just hope that you get it done in time. If it starts to slip in your clutches and you're like, I got to get new clutches, got to get better clutch packs or whatever for it, this is going to cost me some money. That comes with the territory. But what you don't want is you don't want to start breaking real expensive parts and have the car down because you've got a case that has to come because you cracked something along the way. This stuff happens, guys. I've seen this stuff happen with cars, hit and miss, but it's not like it doesn't happen all the time, but you do see them sometimes catastrophically disintegrate, as I was saying earlier. So, but yeah, that's really it. I mean, that's really all I was going to talk about tonight. Just going to go through, if you guys had any questions on anything that you're working on, I'll try to answer that. But in reality, it's really more of an answer to a question that's been coming up fairly regularly with guys. Transmissions. Oh, that's another thing. I've been getting more and more questions on transmission swaps. HP 70 into NAG 1 cars. There ain't no way I would ever try to tackle that. Not even ever would I try to mess with that. I hate to say it, but there's just not, the juice ain't worth the squeeze, as the old saying goes. And I'll even go so far as to say this. There's times where the NAG 1, the thing about transmissions that's funny in a way is that you can have a power glide. You can have a 3-speed, you can have a 4-speed, a 5-speed, a 6-speed, a 7-speed, which came in my Mercedes, an 8-speed, 10-speed, 9, whatever. There's always going to be a spot somewhere in the rev range at some mile an hour where that transmission is absolutely awesome. And there's going to be a spot somewhere where that transmission is going to be terrible. These doldrums that you hit with automatic transmissions, or really any transmission for that matter, but you really notice it with automatics. You go to hit the gas and it downshifts, but it can't downshift all the way. It's kind of in that weird, like, flat spot of a downshift. All transmissions have that. But the NAG 1 does a pretty good job with its torque converter, the torque converter lock-unlock scheduling, and it manages to do exceptionally well. In some areas better than the HP 70. So I would say that overall, yeah, the HP 70 is the better transmission, but there are areas where the NAG 1 actually has a leg up, different mile per hour hits, and just the way that it feels on partial tip in with the lock and unlock of that torque converter, it actually is pretty good stuff. So again, I don't want to crush anybody's dreams. If somebody's out there that is just dying to put an 8-speed in their car, man, more power to you. I would say that I think that you'd have to switch all of your ECU. This is the reason why I wouldn't do it. You'd have to get the Terminator X kit from I guess Holley sells it, and I believe all of the connectors on that are plug and play, but it would have to take the place of your ECU, and it's also going to have to run the 8-speed automatic. So it's got to have the TCM and the ECU for the engine all in one, which I believe that does. And I also want to say, I believe the harness on that is a plug and play. You literally, because it's made for doing engine swaps in like older cars, like a repower setup. I don't know how that would work though with the rest of the car, body control module integration, things like that. I'm sure it's got provisions for all of that, but I think you can see where I'm going with this. It already sounds like a pain in the ass, and that's putting it politely. But I probably would say, look, go nag one, learn how to tune a transmission just for shift scheduling, and that's going to be the biggest. That's going to be the biggest gain that you can really have. Is just, if you want to tune that nag one, you can. DM saying my 2016 Hellcat has that gap in the trans. It's a thing I'd like to have tuned out of my vehicle. That's the thing. You can, because it's numerically, you cannot change gear ratios. You can't really tune it out. You can mask it by extending shift points and making downshift points a little bit lower. You can do that, and you can kind of tune it out, but there it does come a point where you're still going to hit it. And with my Hellcat, I still had that. I mean, it was just, there's always, with all transmissions, you're going to run into that. Even with the 10-speed that's in the F-150, there's some spots where I'm just like, my God, you got 10 speeds, you can find one that would work, but it'll downshift, and it's just not, I should have downshifted or should have sped up a little bit and then downshifted so it'd catch it at a higher RPM. So anyway, that's one of the things I'm still trying to work with the F-150, is just getting that tune a little bit more dialed in, or that portion of the tune a little bit better sorted. Although it's really good now, and I can't. The funny thing with that truck is that I like it so much, and I just don't really want to mess with it anymore. It's really, really good. I could nitpick it, but golly, it's so good that it wouldn't do any good. It would just sound like nagging at this stage of the game. But yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean, and it can be a little bit frustrating, to say the least, when you go to mat the throttle and it's just kind of flat, or it's just kind of dead. I had done a video a while back that was me going through, let's see, it was the HP70 versus HP75, which is the newer trucks. The DT Ram pickup trucks have the HP75. The older trucks, the classics, have the HP70. And I got to tell you guys, HP70 is still really good in the classic Rams. And it works exceptionally well if you've got the 20-inch wheels with 392 gears out back. That is a clean little setup. I've got 321s in Buffy. I don't really have anything to complain about there, but I can tell you that I've had a lot of fun with HP70 cars over the years. It's a really good transmission. And really, as long as you get your shift points down, some torque management, mitigation, there's a few things you can do to spice that transmission up a little bit. Makes it real fun to drive. They're all fun to drive, though. They're all fast, too. That's the fun part of it. But with that, guys, it's a short show tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Post up your comments. You got any questions, I'll try to answer them a little bit later. I've got some work to do tonight, but get out there and do something cool for somebody. Chances are they need it way more than you know. And with that, we will catch you on the next one. That's a wrap.